Patrick, who are you? I feel like this is something I should know. Who are you?
Groucho Marx.
Who is Groucho Marx? Like
Uh,
Karl Marx and Oscar the Grouch had a baby?
exactly. I'm glad you found that one out. No, vaudeville comedian from I think
Okay.
like early days.
Everyone's so good. I'll probably go over like 10 minutes or something just so we can finish steroids and move on. Anabolic, androgenic, exogenous, injectable, swallowable, drug form steroids. So we can finish that and move on. No, yeah, go to your doctor's appointment. Everybody just leave when you want. It's Halloween-ish, kind of. Halloween sort of doesn't exist this year, so it all blends in together. And there's a few of you have these big Halloween non-Grinchy hearts and are giving out, like the full candy bars and stuff. And so go do your night whenever you're ready. It may be at the end of this lecture, it may just be me talking to myself. I don't know, there's a few of you stick around for like half an hour after every lecture. But I just want to get through steroids. Don't feel you have to stay for the whole time. I mean, this is holiday-ish for us. You know all of this stuff, right? Now, I promise we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail eventually. Lipolysis, adipose triglyceride lipase is a little bit different from the PKA signaling perspective. PKA is more hormone-sensitive lipase and perilipin. Right? You're good with that stuff. Our hormone-sensitive lipase is insulin has a more long-term effect on gene expression. That's more what it's about. So I made his coat the most unappealing sort of skin colored coat. That's perilipin, right? So that would be perilipin. And the insulin receptor and PI3K and PKB and GLUT4. And then you have your epinephrine, norepinephrine, glucagon, whatever. But like epinephrine is going to bind to a beta adrenergic receptor and do the adenylyl cyclase or adenylyl cyclase. And so that whole signaling cascade, you're going to get perilipin and you're going to get hormone sensitive lipase activated. But remember, PDE, phosphodiesterase, is going to halt that. So that's insulin's effect through PI3K and PKB. Insulin's effect is going to halt lipolysis through PDE. So anabolic stuff, catabolic stuff, it's all coming from cholesterol, all of these things. A cholesterol backbone. Remember the testosterone diurnal effects, this 24-hour circadian rhythm effects, all of these things, all of these hormones. I mean, it's just you're binding stuff to binding proteins along the way. And so that's what this is, the binding protein. About half of your T and estradiol are bound to that. Nutrition can affect it. So can physical activity. If you're jogging all of the time, if you're a very aerobic creature, testosterone goes down in males, testosterone goes down. Myostatin, follistatin is the binding protein. So this actually is very anabolic because you're inactivating a catabolic thing. What if we acted out mTOR interpretive dancing? Yeah, I think that's possible. There's definitely room for extra credit for interpretive dancing of mTOR. Definitely. Growth hormone. What is growth hormone? Well, it's this thing, right? There's 191 amino acids in the major version, the version that's mostly in circulation. These little red amino acids, get rid of those, and you have the second most abundant version of mTOR. The second most abundant isoform. There's a bunch of these variants of mTOR. Women tend to be higher, right, than guys. Now, IGF is comparable. Men and women have similar IGF, and so the subsequent effects on the liver of growth hormone, men maybe are a little bit more sensitive, something like that. But women tend to be higher in growth hormone. The most abundant version is this, and obviously you don't need to know what this. I'm not going to like put this diagram on the test and say which one is right. I wouldn't do anything like that. But there's a bunch of different versions, right? So this is just a bunch of these like isoforms and these versions of these variants of growth hormone. There's a ton of these things. And so it's just all you really need to know here is the idea that there's a growth hormone is similar to saying there is a human genome. There's like everyone has, unless you have an identical twin, everyone has their own genome, right? There isn't like the human genome, the implied singularity. Same thing with like growth hormone. There's versions of this thing. Stuff that promotes it. We went over this. Don't get super stressed this Halloween. Obesity is going to suppress it, and ghrelin is going to have, remember, growth hormone releasing, GHR, ghrelin, Ellen, I guess. So it's a growth hormone releasing Ellen, degenerous. And the if you fast for a long time from out of your gastrointestinal tract, mostly your stomach, you're going to get a bunch of ghrelin. You'll get growth hormone from that. Exercise, vigorous exercise, get a bunch of lactate going, and that corresponds to big growth hormone surges. It's pulsatile, right? It's pulsatile, the release of this stuff. And sleep, deep sleep, and strenuous exercise, you're going to get some bigger pulses, some bigger um, surges of growth hormone. Remember JAK-STAT, that's a signaling cascade. Takes time in exercise, takes a little time for that to go up. Epinephrine goes up right away. You know about the HP whatever axes, in this case HPT, to get to the thyroid. Triiodothyronine, that's the major one. But these ones, the more potent one, the more prevalent, right, is thyroxine. This is what's coming out of the thyroid in a greater bulk is going to be your T4. But the more bioactive, the more potent one is going to be your T3. And remember, it gets into the cell, right? It crosses membranes like a steroid hormone would, although it doesn't get there on its own. It needs assistance. But so it's sort of almost like a hybrid of a steroid and a polypeptide hormone. A polypeptide, just like every cell can make these. I mean, you just link together a bunch of amino acids, sometimes like one amino acid if it's an amine hormone. You link together some amino acids, and now you have polypeptide hormone, and those are always just binding to cell surfaces, except for the thyroid hormones. But thyroid hormones also, when you see this, AKT is PKB, that's the same thing, protein kinase B, mTOR, P70S6K, that signaling cascade, right? So this is downstream from insulin, as you know, insulin to PI3K to PKB. So insulin activates PKB. Downstream from PKB, you are seeing GLUT4 translocation, but also you're seeing protein translation. So translocation of GLUT4, but translation of protein. So let's hypertrophy, let's grow, let's remodel, let's repair, let's reassemble things. You can say, yeah, whatever, the Anastasia. It's just a good story. I will never ask about Anastasia on a quiz or a test or anything, but it's a good story to illustrate this idea that we often hold emotional positions, emotional, not really just beliefs, but we hold these emotional facts of how we conduct ourselves and what we assume is true. I would say belief is something different than our assumption of fact. And but our facts get very emotional and incongruent with real facts, and that's what the best story is. Just Anna Anderson, when they do DNA testing, you're like, nope, I don't know what else to show you. There's no amount of evidence that I can present to these people that's going to change their mind. They are gung-ho about Anastasia, and she died, she was shot by the Bolsheviks, and I wonder, is anybody dressed up as like a dead Anastasia for Halloween? If anyone's dressed up as like a bloody Anastasia, you get 3 points. But the only point of telling you the story is that we need to be open when new facts are presented with our old facts. It's sort of a Bayesian approach, and I don't even talk about what Bayesian means in 180, but that's sort of like a epidemiology, biostatistics kind of updating of our information, incorporating new information. That's the colloquial sort of way of saying it. But we have to be open to new facts. And when new facts run contrary to our old emotional facts, maybe we have some self-reflection, some evaluation to do. And that's why I tell the Anastasia story, not because I think like the Romanov family is the most interesting piece of history or something. It's just this little story is such a great narrative for how we reason. And I just want to one more time. I just want to kind of give some credit to Peter Harmer. He publishes in the New England Journal of Medicine, in Lancet. I mean, this is a like a world-renowned researcher. And I was just a super anti-steroid guy. I was adhering to all of these same things that Peter's like, no, let me walk you through the arguments here, and let's go step by step through these arguments. And I've put my own spin on these things and have some different things to say, but the groundwork, the foundation, the rebar for this building really comes from Peter Harmer. Remarkable guy. He's also one more thing about some part of my process in teaching is I want to position everybody for the best success that they can have following graduation. Now, if you think I'm mean in my grading or my standards are unreasonable or something, life is going to be maniacal, and it is going to be so punishing to you because life compared to me is like a demon. Life gosh comes at you and is so unforgiving. And the first person, like I'm sure all of you, like high school is just a breeze. You go through, you don't do anything, you pay attention to nothing. Like you have headphones in while you're in high school class and you still get A's. Like it was just super easy. You don't do anything, and it's super easy. And then I started in college and it was sort of similar. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And the first person who ever held me seriously accountable was Peter Harmer, was this guy. And I would turn in my work and it was the same quality of work I do for other professors. And it was like an essay, and I turn in like 4 pages and he reads maybe 3 or 4 sentences. And I swear this is exactly what he took a red pen and he underlined after like 4 sentences. He put a bunch of commentary, stuff for me to pay attention to in those 4 sentences, and then he put an underline, and then with a red pen that said, "I stopped reading here." And there's like 3 3/4 pages left, and then I'm like, why didn't you read the rest? He's like, oh, it was mindless dribble. That's the exact quotation. Mindless dribble is what he called it. And of course, I'm like huffing and puffing, like, oh, come on. I'm all pissed and cussing and stuff, huffing, puffing, and cussing. And then it just took me like a week to realize the guy was fucking totally right. And he changed my life in terms of holding me accountable. And if he was easy on me, if he didn't shove information at me and make me know it, I wouldn't have gone and gotten a PhD. No way. No way I would have done that. I would be working some minimum wage job and I wouldn't know anything. And it's the people who hold you accountable. And so Peter Harmer was the first person ever to actually hold me accountable. And I owe a great deal of my career to him and sort of what I have come to learn and understand and my position. If I didn't encounter a Peter Harmer in life, I would not have been advanced into a way that I could actually manage my way in life. Because I later realized like Peter was right about everything. So, but the science and ethics, he set the groundwork. And then that's sort of what I've moved forward with ever since. Now, in ergogenic aid, it's just improved stuff. Physiological aids are really what we're talking about, but the legal differences of why you go to prison for some of these and why you can buy others at S-Mart, that needs to be a rational, reasonable, scientific explanation. That needs to be a matter of understandable science and reason and logic. Hormones. We all know what hormones are. We all know what steroid hormones are. Anabolic androgenic steroids, or if I just say androgens, that's these we're in DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone, right? We're in androstenedione, we're testosterone, we're dihydrotestosterone, DHT, androgens. Now, testosterone, remember, is a primary androgen. That's the one that is going to interact with your skeletal muscle tissue most potently. If you want to grow and be athletic and use it for athletic endeavors, testosterone is the one you want. But there's these synthetic versions. And let's see if we can with the esters, let's extend the half-life of this stuff, throw a big carbon chain on there, and let's see if we can get undetectable, throw in some stanozolol, and so there's exogenous steroids, tons of these things. I mean, next year there'll be more, right? But the question about ethics, and again, I'll refer to Joe Biden later, which is why I have him saying my made-up quotation. I don't get sued by like the Biden administration, like his cabinet lawyer comes after me because I never said such a thing. But this is consistent with what his position is. That's why I put my words in his mouth. Now, remember, there are 9 of these oppositions to steroids. There are 9 of these oppositions, and the 9th one we haven't talked about yet. This is really what everybody believes, but this is what everybody says is these 8. Now, I will want you to know, you don't have to know the details of these, but I do want you to know what the arguments are. At the end of today, I will tell you what the 9th one is, and everyone will be like, oh yeah, I guess that is what people think and what I sort of still think. And it's even me. I am still tempted to it's a tempting hot tub to climb into, that 9th one. It doesn't make any sense, but the first 8 are what everybody says. So beginning with the purported effects are unproven, right? Oh, they don't do anything anyway. There's no evidence that they actually do anything. Remember this Wilson article that even just in the last few years, right? These are my screenshots of a Google search for it, and it says, because there it says the number of citations, and it's up, what is it, 61 in 3 years, and so we're still citing this thing. And that is a 575 citations. That's a lot. That is a lot of citations. Van Ness has a paper that's pretty good. It has like 40 citations or something. That's pretty good. You get into meta-analyses and stuff, and you're going to get higher citations. But 575, that's a big impact paper right there. But remember this idea of the therapeutic dose. A therapeutic dose. If you have a headache and it says, well, take 2 Tylenol, but then like try to wean yourself off because your liver's going to die if you keep doing these double doses. But you have to take a therapeutic dose to actually get this effect. If you go take a quarter Tylenol, your period cramps are still cramping up, right? It's still like punch in your guts. If you take a quarter dose, your migraine is still all grainy, and you have to get to a therapeutic dose of here. And so you look at some of these steroid articles, and it's like, well, we gave people 50 milligrams of tea or something. Well, I don't know. I mean, hormone replacement therapy for some people, that might be like 75 milligrams or something like that. Let's just up levels consistently a little, maybe, but they're not looking for an athletic effect from that. They're looking at like, let's get your levels back to where what's a sort of a normal version. Now, the purported effects are unproven. Still, another way of evaluating this is just sort of the bench science approach. Well, what is it doing? Well, it's increasing nuclei, myonuclei. We see these myosatellite cells from these little brown guys, and you're going to increase myonuclei. Let's donate some nucleuses, some nuclei to this muscle. And if you get more nuclei in a single cell, that cell can grow more. You increase the growth ceiling, the expansion. You increase the dimensions of the yard, right? So you buy property, and it's like, oh, you have 1 acre. All right. Now, if you want to get more acreage, you got to throw in some more nuclei in there. And then your fence line gets to expand a little bit. That was a terrible analogy. I think you get what I'm saying. The more nuclei you deposit in a single muscle cell, a muscle fiber, a muscle cell, the more nuclei, it's multinucleated, a muscle cell, because they're huge. Muscle cells are huge. They have multiple nucleuses, right? And so the more growth potential you're going to have. And that doesn't seem to go away. Once you stop doing steroids, you seem to retain those nuclei. It's not like, well, you're done with steroids, let's clear on out of here, right? The big exodus of nuclei, that doesn't happen. You still keep them. And so you retain sort of a different genetic domain of muscle at that point. Sort of more governments linger, and the growth ceiling is sort of forever higher. Remember, you can also do, these are 3 different studies, but there's infinity studies on this. I mean, you could, I just, you don't need to know these studies. I put them in here so you can say, okay, where do I want to start my reading? If you care to further your own reading on this subject, if this becomes a topic that you want to explore, if it becomes a topic that fascinates you, you know articles to get started on. That's why I'm putting those in there. So, uh, patient populations, cachectic populations, muscle wasting, and you're going to see, more hypertrophy, a inhibition of atrophy. You're going to see this positive protein synthesis, protein turnover, growth in patients who are wasting away. Suddenly, they're returning to a normal baseline, right? So you will see that in clinical populations. And in athletes, it's more epidemiological. Athletes, we get more observational. That's what I mean by epidemiological. It's observational. You can't do a randomized controlled trial and say, all right, you get 1,000 milligrams of testosterone and you get saline. You don't get to do that analysis. And so what you do is you look at bodybuilders, right? You just look at these bodybuilders. All right, let's do some surveys, and let's hopefully we can get some blood, and we'll start measuring things, and we're not telling subjects to do steroids. We're just evaluating behaviors that people are already doing, just like we do with cigarettes, just like we do with something like fetal alcohol syndrome. You don't give pregnant mothers alcohol and say, what happens to the kid, right? What you do is you notice people's free will. You notice the behaviors that people do on their own accord, by their own decisions. You notice those things, and then make claims about them, right? So whether you are East German swimmers, right? Whether you are the Ronnie Colemans of the world, you just get on a Olympia stage. That's it, right? That's how you get these things really to uh, performance in steroid research. It's a lot of epidemiological stuff. Now, the athlete's health. Remember Thomas Jefferson, it does me no harm for my neighbor to say there's, no God or 20 gods, and either picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. These founding principles of America, where just we all get to believe in what we want, right? If you want to be Catholic, if you want to be a Muslim, if you want to be a Mormon, if you want to be a Jehovah's Witness, if you want to be whatever. You go down this list for like, you can be anything, right? You could be whatever you want to be, and it doesn't affect me, right? Whatever religious choice you have, whatever athletic team you decide to support. I'm Yankees, I'm Red Sox, whatever. You can believe in Anna Anderson, fine, right? Nobody, if you're not harming anybody else, nobody gets to tell you what to do. For crimes to be criminal, for any verb to enter that domain of criminality, there needs to be a victim. Victimless crimes don't make any sense. And now you could say, well, okay, my neighbor eats so much Oreo ice cream cake that he now has diabetes and he doesn't have insurance, and so my taxes go up or whatever. Okay, there's argument can be made about the public health and steroids, the public health and cocaine, the public health and ice cream. Yes. All right, fine. You don't really get to legislate people's behaviors in that way. You know, we don't care about Barry Bonds's liver and heart, and we don't care about those things. What we care about is the number of home runs he hits, 73 in a season or whatever, and a billion in a career. That's what people care about. And we don't get to legislate things like you can't be sedentary. For each minute you're sedentary, right, we charge you a quarter. Or so you actually don't get to legally do that. And it's the same thing with steroids. It doesn't make any sense. Sedentary behavior, way more harmful. Way more harmful. I mean, these are different leagues than steroid use. If you do anabolic steroids and you go be, physically active, and let's say you're like a tennis player and you're like a collegiate tennis player, and you're physically active, and you do a couple cycles of steroids compared to a sedentary person who's I mean, the side effects of sedentary behavior are staggering. And who is legislating that you can't, well, okay, well, high glycemic carbs, that's a Schedule 3 controlled substance, right? Get those bananas out of your mouth. And beer, oof, yeah, the carbs in beer, man, that thing, guy, we can get up over a glycemic index of 100 with that stuff, and getting into this maltose. And you don't legislate those things. Are they more harmful than steroids? Yeah, of course they are. But are they illegal? No. And they can't be. You can't make them illegal, right? Maybe there's some condition at which some political climate where it's like, okay, look, we're all going to die, and the population is going to end if we don't get off our asses and start eating better. There's no such thing as pregnancy anymore. We have to figure out how to prolong the life of our species. Maybe there's circumstances, but anabolic steroids is banned without those weird circumstances, without those sort of world-ending circumstances. And when we start looking at lipid panels, now this is a combination of both the heart and the liver. The liver, remember, and this is, I do want you to know this, the liver is what is regulating your lipids. The liver is regulating your lipids, your HDLs, your LDLs, total cholesterol. The liver is the primary organ, the primary culprit responsible for this. If you eat steroids, if you get some pill and put it in your mouth, right, and swallow it, first stop is the liver. Oh, first stop is the stomach, whatever. But you get the idea. The first, before entering systemic circulation, before going around and the left ventricle throws it, casts it into the body, and your biceps are out in your body, and your glutes and legs and abs and pecs and shoulders and whatever, all these things are like the systemic part. Before it gets there, it has to stop by the liver if you eat it. And when you see that happen, when that happens, HDL goes down, LDL goes up. That's bad. Okay, there's also pileosis hepatis. That's on the next slide. But when your cholesterol gets all messy, that's a risk factor for adverse cardiovascular events. Get your blood pressure up, get your immune system a little bit wonky, right? Let's get those white count really up and oxidize a bunch of stuff. So there are risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And poor cholesterol, not necessarily high cholesterol. If you have high HDLs, that's wonderful. But poor cholesterol, high LDLs, and a poor lipid profile, low HDLs. This is a risk factor for heart attacks and strokes and any embolism, any infarction, where you're going to get this risk, like, oh well, let me just have horrible cholesterol, and I'll take my baby aspirin. Like, that's not really, don't bother. So this is potentially a problem, but it's only a problem if you eat it. Same thing with pileosis hepatis, right? This is a problem if you eat it. Now, it's rarely a problem. Remember, this was a house episode. It's rarely a problem, but it can be. This can be a problem. But when this comes up and I say just Tylenol, for all of these health complications that associate with steroids, I can just point at something on the shelf at S-Mart and say that's worse. That's more harmful. Whatever side effects you come up with for steroids, we can just go to the grocery store and I'll find something that's worse, and nobody has a problem with it. And so, but when I say stuff like that, like, hey, Tylenol is way worse for your liver. Tylenol, let's say it's this guy. It's like, oh, it's just so much easier. Everybody messes up their liver with steroids. Nobody's messing up their liver with Tylenol. This is just, you take your headache and it's gone. It's just, as you know, that's not true. Tylenol is a leading cause of liver failure in the United States. It's the #1 cause, really high mortality, and it doesn't seem to be going away. And this came out in 2016, and it's looking at in recent years. Acetaminophen, that's what Tylenol is. Acetaminophen-related adverse events continue to be a public health burden. You can do this yourself, right? Just if you want to know if your liver's messed up, you don't have to go get a biopsy or like, oh, let me go get surgery and look at it. Let me take it out and evaluate it. It's going to be releasing some proteins, some enzymes get out into the bloodstream, AST, ALT, and all you have to do is measure stuff in the blood. That's a good index of damage. And so go take some Tylenol and see what's happening. Yes, the liver heals wonderfully. The liver is a great healer, as long as you don't kill the thing. It's like a really loyal, dog in an abusive family. It still just comes back until it doesn't, until you kill it. But the sort of the best way to kill is with Tylenol, not with steroids. And the heart, that's another one, another major side effect of steroids that gets reported. And it's not really, it's sort of more fiction. It's sort of, we're entering the realm of physiological fantasy here. Can it be affected? The answer is yes. It can be affected. Is it going to be affected with the doses and durations of steroids people are doing? Nah, probably not. It doesn't seem to be impaired at all, like not the tiniest bit. Now, when you go year after year, consistent doses, large doses, and you're using it sort of inappropriately and excessively, and to excessive doses and durations, yes, yeah, sure. The squeeze, right? Get some systole, a little compromise in there. Yes, you can see some compromise, but yeah, that's not what people are doing for the most part, right? You're not really seeing that. And sort of study after study, you see a very similar result of all this. We're like, well, the left ventricle, we're not really seeing the compromise that it's accused of. And so it's the heart is indicted, or steroids rather are indicted, and the victim is the heart, right? I was assaulted by steroids, and it goes to court, and it turns out the case is thrown out because well, steroids was like at home napping at the time of the assault. So that's sort of the idea of the heart. Now, what I'm not saying what I'm not saying is that steroids have no side effects. I'm not saying that. There's mood swings, and yeah, you get some acne, and oh, there's masculinizing effects, especially in women. Um, let's like when a woman hits menopause, like the hair starts thinning and falling out, and like you just increase androgens. And I had a girlfriend when I lived in Chicago who it was having acne, and so she went to the doctor, and they gave her an androgen receptor blocker. Okay, now I was like lying in bed one night, and I looked over. I'm like, "Oh, what's that?" She's like, "Oh, it's my acne med." And I pick it up, like, "This is an androgen receptor blocker." Um, Whew, yeah, just make sure that stays away from me. I don't want like an androgen receptor blocker. Uh, so this is whether it's acne, or it's hair follicles, or it's moods, or yeah, there are side effects. There are definitely side effects to elevated androgens. What I'm saying is a lot of these really scary ones are kind of made up, or they can be avoided by just injecting, right? You can inject and avoid some of these bad ones. Really, the liver related stuff, that's really the bad stuff. And you avoid that by injecting. Now, remember that androstenedione, I mean, this is the immediate precursor to testosterone in the androgen kind of cascade. The immediate precursor is androstenedione. And on January 20th, 2005, it was banned to the point where you go to prison for this stuff. The first article to come out about its side effects and its toxicity, for hepato, so this is liver. So let's look at, does this affect the liver? People are doing this orally. And the first ever study to come out about the safety of this was a month later. It was in February, and they didn't find any side effects, but it was already illegal. So people don't care. Legislation has no interest in whether people are getting injured. And really, they shouldn't, because alcohol is legal, cigarettes are legal, birthday cake is legal, peeps are legal, sedentary behavior is legal. They really shouldn't care, but they don't, because there was no evidence. The first study with evidence came out a month later and said there isn't any. So that's the purported effects are unproven in the athlete's health. The next one is the unnecessary risk for harm and undue social coercion, meaning other people are doing it, so you have to too. There are other people who are doing steroids, which means if you want to keep up, if you want to compete at that level, if you want to stay competitive, if you want to, keep on that playing field, keep on the court, and keep up with them, man, now I have to do it too. Coercion, right? This is like peer pressure. It's the equivalent of peer pressure, and so that's they're breaking the law, so I have to break the law. They're oh, everyone else is cheating on their taxes, and so I have to cheat on my taxes so I can keep up with the Joneses. That stupid cliche. That's the argument for coercion here. But all you have to do, I googled this I just this morning. I'm like, you know what? Here's how silly this is. Let me just type this into Google. When was forced labor ended in the U.S.? This is the 1865. Right? So nobody is forcing you to do this. Now, obviously, one should be sensitive to things like human trafficking. This is a massive problem. I don't know. I'm not like an expert in it, so I don't know what the numbers are, but it's a tragic problem. I don't know how widespread it is. Tragedy, human trafficking. Yeah, that's forced labor. That's definitely forced. I don't even know what to call it, labor. That's forced terrible. But nobody's doing that in sports. Nobody is kidnapping you from like your childhood home and forcing you to do steroids and to compete better in basketball. This is totally voluntary. Nobody is demanding that you do this. So there's no such thing as in the United States, right? You just go to Wikipedia and look at the history of labor law in the US, and you'll see how ridiculous this idea of social coercion is. It doesn't exist, right? There are laws against this. You're not forced to do anything. Now, in most sports, though, in the pro level, let's say it's basketball, you're in the NBA, you probably have to do some dose of androgens and probably some EPO, erythropoietin. Let's get our VO2 max up a little bit, getting up and down that court all night. That's really tough on the cells on oxidative backbone of our cells. And how do I get back on the court tomorrow? Right? How do I keep my form? How does um, LeBron James keep from looking like Manute Bol? Google Manute Bol if you've never seen him. How do they avoid dwindling into nothing with so much aerobic activity, all that AMPK activation, and we'll just do a little bit of steroids. Let's try to preserve our tissue and let's increase recuperative power and get back on the court tomorrow, back on the field, on the ice, in the water, in the whatever your environment is. Probably necessary. Steroids are probably necessary if you want to compete. Will you get some side effects? Likely. Yeah, you'll likely get some side effects. You're also likely to get side effects from ibuprofen. Ibuprofen probably shouldn't be over the counter. You probably shouldn't just be able to. I mean, it's a horrible drug, and you'll probably get some side effects from that. But that doesn't mean they should be illegal. It's just sort of part of the game. Ibuprofen is really part of the game. Just ask any athletic trainer. Is ibuprofen part of, and then whatever sport it is field hockey, it's cross country or track or something, it's baseball. I mean, when I played baseball, I was taking like 6 ibuprofen a day for shin splints, and which is weird for baseball to have like shin splints. That means you're running too much. You shouldn't be doing all this like distance running for baseball, but it's part of the game. These analgesics, these anti-pain meds are part of the game. So are steroids if you want to compete at that problem. But that's not a socio-political problem. That's not a legislative problem. That's the game. Right now in football, you're essentially guaranteed to withstand injurious impact, right? To endure injury after injury. 300-pound people are running into you and hitting you as hard as they can. That's the game, right? That's football. And nobody's making you play. No more than is anybody making you take steroids. Nobody is making you do any of this stuff. You don't have to play the game. The game is way more harmful than steroids, and nobody's making you play. Just like nobody's making you take steroids to be better at that game. Now, the average length of an NFL career, you can look up these things. This is from ESPN, so I'm not pretending this, or that when I put up Wikipedia or put up that Google thing, these are just colloquial. Like, here's a quick answer if you want it. There's literature that you can find on these things, and in the literature you can find you enforce some exclusionary criteria. They have to be starting for this. You have some of these conditions of inclusion and some exclusionary criteria for which you exclude players from, and maybe you can get that up a little bit. But it's a few years, maybe 3.5 years, something like that is the average NFL career. Do those players want to retire 3 years into their career? No, they're fucked up, right? The sport destroyed them, and they're kind of limping along for the rest of their life, and worried about how bad those concussions are going to be when they're 53. The sport messed them up. That's why they stopped playing. They didn't stop playing because, like, well, I saw my 3 years and I got my salary, and I'm not going to go bankrupt at a casino like everybody else, right? There's injuries that are taking people away from the sport, not steroids. Steroids isn't injuring them. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a story now and again about somebody who did steroids excessively and had an adverse event, just like there's a story now and again about somebody who died of caffeine overdose. More than now and again, right? So there are narratives, there are stories about these things, but don't let stories cloud science. Let science be science. Let stories be stories. Stories are great for the newspaper. Stories. Mother Teresa had this. I've always cited her. I don't know that I've ever actually read her specific words, but about how you present a bunch of science to people. You present a bunch of statistics. Nobody cares. Nobody donates. Nobody's inspired. Nobody's moved to give a dollar or a damn. But you talk about one person. You talk about one case, and people are moved to tears and to signing checks. And that's what you see from like an animal shelter. You don't see, well, your $3 is going to save 11,000 dogs, and then you don't hear that. You see a picture of a sad crying dog that looks like it was kicked. It's like a dog, and they're like, okay, maybe we'll show a second dog. This is what moves people, is these emotions. Statistics don't move people. But if you want to make good decisions in life, if you want to understand phenomena in according to reality, allow science to be science. Don't take the single narrative. That never works. No, not that it never works. You get what I'm saying. Now, football, right? This article came out in 91. By 1991, there are 1.5 million people playing each year and 1.2 million registered injuries by football. I mean, this is crazy. This is the yearly stuff. And you can find more articles like this that really break down the type of injury and how prevalent these injuries are, what the annual incidence is of this and that. But what you learn in doing this, or what you have learned if you've done this before, is that a lot of these sports, I mean, football among them, really the most violent injuries are coming from cheerleading. If you're an athletic trainer, you've taken athletic training courses or something like that, it's like, what are the most violent sports there are? What's like bull riding, like PBR, professional bull riding, and cheerleading? Those flyers get up there like 20 feet, and I mean, there's like spectacular injuries in those things. Football too, though. Football is not as devastating often as those two. I'm more worried about the cheerleaders on the sidelines than I am about the player being speared or whatever. But the injuries are outrageous in some of these sports. Not all. Some sports are pretty safe, but nobody says that, well, a difficult, challenging, injurious sport must be illegal. Let's say it's 20 times as dangerous as steroids, so it's 20 times as illegal. The prison sentence is 20 times as long if you toss a football in your yard as if you inject steroids in your yard. Nobody makes that claim, right? So there's really no such thing as this unnecessary risk for harm or a social coercion. And again, this isn't like an incidence of flag waving here. This is just like any first world country. First world is an outdated term. Any sort of progressive country is, you're not forced to do anything. We have like child labor laws, the 40-hour work week. Unions accomplished a lot in life. I don't know how useful they are today, but there's the world was advanced by labor unions a lot, and you're just not forced to do shitty things anymore. Read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. It's on my shelf somewhere behind me. This book really illustrates how shitty life used to be. And Life isn't like that anymore. That's not a portrait of life in the 21st century. You're not forced to do anything. Now, when you talk about undue social coercion, let's say you have two options. You could go work at Taco Bell, or you could do some cycles of, D-ball or whatever, and get your NFL contract. So I can make 7 million, 8 million, 20 million. I don't know how much athletes make. 7-figure salary or 8-figure salary. A lot of figures in a salary you can make by playing football. Or, oh, I could go work for Taco Bell. What are you talking about undue? Like, the steroids are not undue here if they're earning you millions of dollars in exchange for marginal risk of some manageable side effects. What is likely marginal risk of manageable side effects? And please realize that this is not a lecture in which I'm telling you go do steroids. I'm not encouraging it, right? I went through my whole bodybuilding phase, everything, without touching a single thing that would do anything to hormones, other than exercise itself and trying to get good sleep and whatever, and no drugs and supplements and stuff. So it's not like I'm this big proponent. I'm open to facts, and I haven't heard a good argument that makes any sense. It's all just fallacy. So saying, like, I mean, steroids really is the game here, and in the same way that getting hit by players is the game. So I want to play in the NFL, but I don't want people to hit me very hard. That's the same thing. I mean, literally, that's like identical to saying I want to be in the NFL, but I don't want anybody to do steroids. I don't want to do steroids. I don't want anybody doing steroids. That's the game. It's the same thing as being hit hard. You don't get to tell the commissioner or whoever. I clearly know nothing about football, and I don't even know how many players on our team, but you don't get to change the rules and say, okay, I want to play football, but nobody gets to tackle me, nobody gets to hit me, no steroids in the game. It's just, you sign up for the game, or you don't sign up for the game, and you sort of have to take everything that comes with it. So that's the harm to other people part, is the same thing as these. It's like, oh, I don't want people to hit me. Well, that's, don't play then. Play like flag football. I mean, that's what are you talking about, harm? Like, play a different league. Nobody's forcing you. There's no. I mean, laws exist to prevent people from forcing you to play. So that's not how the world works. At least, you know, first through 50th world countries. So the next one is the steroids are unfair, right? And so this idea of the level playing field. It's not a level playing field. Somebody has an advantage that I don't have, right? Somebody else is taking advantage of something that I don't have that advantage. That's an unlevel playing field. And this became a huge cliche. And I cringe when I hear it. Because think about things like genetics, think about things like family income. These are not level. There's no genetics where I think, unless you have, again, an identical twin. If you have an identical twin, then okay, your genetics, you have a level playing field there, fine, with your twin, and that's it. Family to family, people don't have the same amount of money. It should cost money. The gym membership and the trainer and the dietitian and the supplements. Everything costs a ton of money. Education, it's the same thing. It's not a level playing field. You have somebody who is paying a bunch of money for private tutors to get you into a better college and stuff. That's not a level playing field. At no part in life are you going to encounter a level playing field. Steroids are actually level. It's funny how level they are, because everyone has access to it. It does essentially does the exact same thing, and everyone can do it. But like money, not go get a bunch of money. Like, oh, just tell your mom and dad that to make $1 million this year, and then go ahead and tell your mom and dad to reprogram their genomes so that you're 7 feet tall now. That's that. You can't change these things. Steroids, anyone can do and change. It's like cheap. And so this is David Epstein. He's not a scientist. He's a writer for Sports Illustrated, but this book was good. It's not a science book. It is journalism, but it's science journalism. It was good though, the Sports Gene. And he does this breakdown of the disparity in basketball. If you are 7 feet tall, I mean, this isn't a quotation from the book, this is an interview, but he does a better job in the book. I just didn't feel like flipping through the book and taking a screenshot of it. And so I Googled it, and this was the closest thing I could find of his actual exact words. So this is him talking in an interview. He does a better job in the book of this, but I don't know where the hell it is in the book. I did it a long time ago. I did an on Audible, so I wouldn't think I could even find it. But if you are 7 feet tall, if it's today, it's 2020 outside, like everyone has COVID, and you're between the ages of 20 and 40 and you're 7 feet tall, there's a 17% chance you're in the NBA. Now, decrease your height by 6 inches. Those odds go way down. Decrease your height by another 6 inches, and it's like you're better off winning the lottery. This is just genetic lottery. I mean, this is really an unlevel playing field, as unlevel as it gets. There's nothing less level than genes, right? I mean, if you're 3'7" and your dream is to be in the NBA, I have nothing but sympathy for you. If you are 7 feet tall and you're trying to win in limbo, sorry, I don't have any sympathy because you're probably in the NBA and you have tons of money, but genes are they determine so much and you have no control over them. There's nothing you can do to control your genome. And even in the NBA, what's your salary? What's your earning? Well, I don't know. How tall are you? I mean, that's if we're doing these linear regression models, it determines so much. Now, there's criticism for I think Jesse brought this up about how many people in baseball have a diagnosis of ADD, so you can get Adderall. You could say the same thing about how many people have asthma. I don't know what it's half of athletes for whom an inhaler would enhance their performance have a diagnosis of asthma. They get to use the inhaler legally. And these are ergogenic aids that are conditionally banned. Sort of a problem if not everybody can use them. Now, steroids, really it's kind of cheap. I mean, it's just like an inhaler costs more. I mean, comparable. An inhaler is like comparable. Most of these drugs are sort of comparable in price. How much does it cost to hire a nutritionist? More than steroids. How much does it cost to have a private coach? More than steroids. I mean, like the financial element here, people, like poor people, can take steroids. Rich people can do steroids and other stuff. Poor people are like, well, what's the best bang for the buck? Steroids is probably the best bang. It's the only thing I can afford. I can do creatine and steroids, and then I can get my bag of rice from Costco, and I catch a wild raccoon and eat it for protein. It's cheap, but if there were a law that prohibited specific people from using steroids, but permitted other people to do it, yes, that would be a level playing field. And that's sort of what exists today. When you ban steroids, but if you're rich enough, right, you can get around this. If you're rich enough, you can get around this. So money and genetics are the unlevelest playing fields there are. Steroids actually aren't. I mean, if everybody could just go take testosterone, I mean, it's totally level. Just whether you're willing to do that, whether you're willing to put health and perception of being natural on the line. So just imagine this. There are two baseball players. One of them, think like the Sammy Sosas of the world. Now, I don't know how true some of these urban legends about Sammy Sosa are. He was this great home run hitter in the age of Mark McGwire. He was sort of Mark McGwire Jr. But the story is like, he grows up playing with like rocks and sticks. He's like so poor, he plays with rocks and sticks. But let's just say there's a version of Sammy Sosa that's nonfiction and even more extreme. There's this kid who's so poor that, let's say they're both boys, just for the sake of baseball. They can be both girls in softball. Who cares? Whatever. Let's say they're both boys and are playing baseball. And one kid is so poor that he just plays in the street with, he breaks a branch off of his neighbor's little deciduous tree that has nice sticks, and then he plays with rocks in the street, and that's his bat. I mean, and the other one, it has, rich parents. They're both attorneys, and he has private everything. The other kid has private everything. He has his, he's like 12 years old and he's on every supplement, and he has an Olympic coach, and he has just sort of these tutors, and he has a biomechanist on call that films all of his swings and goes over his mechanics afterward. He hires Nolan Ryan or something as his pitching coach, some famous baseball player as a pitching coach. And they really create this environment for success. The other kid is playing in the street with rocks and sticks. Okay, now they both go to high school or go to college or whatever, and they get cut. The kid who plays with sticks gets cut from the team, right? The kid with the private coaching is obviously the star of the team because that's how life works. It's a bunch of practice and skill and advancement. That's how life works. You even look at relative age effects. If somebody's just a little bit older, I mean, Google relative age effect and then whatever sport you care about. And you will see the people who are older in school, their birthday falls in whatever it is, January, or compared to whatever later in the year. They have maturation. They're a few months or 6 months, let's say, ahead of their peers. And if you're 15 or 15 and 6 months, 15 and a half, the 15 and a half year old has like a 15th of their life that they have developed beyond the other people. So even like relative age effect, something that small is so important in who goes pro. Hockey and soccer, I think that's sort of where this stuff started. But you even see it in Olympic weightlifting. You see relative age effects even there. But life just isn't fair, and we have to accept that. Genetics, money, these are the most important things to prepare people for any field. Genetics and money. There's nothing that can compare to those two factors at preparing people in academics, preparing people in athletics, preparing people in any endeavor. It's money and it's genetics. And those are the least fair, least level fields there are in the world. The sport just doesn't care. The sport does not care if you have the biggest heart in the world. If, like, look, little Tommy played in the street 16 hours a day with his branch, right, and his little clump of pebbles that was taped together so it wouldn't be as hard as a real rock. 16 hours a day he played. The sport doesn't care. The sport cares if the bat connects with the ball during tryouts. The sport cares if the puck gets by the goalie, or the ball, if it's soccer, gets by the goalie, or the body that like leans into the ribbon, or the car that crosses. That's all the sport cares about. Was it like a swish, or did it like, brick? The sport does not care about your heart. And again, genetics, ridiculously unlevel playing field. Now, the kid who plays with rocks and sticks, let's say he goes and does a cycle of steroids to try to catch up, because it costs like $200, and that's what he can do. I mean, it would cost $500 a session to go get the Olympic coach. $200, all right, a few weeks of DECA or something like that. It's just gonna like make the newspaper that he cheated, right? Unlevel playing field. He had an unfair advantage. A super poor kid who played with rocks and sticks, who houses a tent. That's like in the newspaper that he cheated, and it's unfair to the rich kid. It's super unfair to the rich kid who's like 6'6", that the kid who lives in a tent, who can only afford rice cooked in water from the Calaveras River, did a cycle of steroids. I mean, it's so insane when you start to put it into narrative perspective. But what's even more hilarious is nobody wants a level playing field. Nobody wants a level playing field. What's the single biggest criticism of soccer? Shit ends in a tie. That's what people say. Not like you can only use two of your limbs, right? Like, oh, what happens to the other two limbs? So just don't use them. Nobody says that other than me right now. Nobody ever says that. What people say is, oh, like that it can end in a tie. What is a tie? Well, it's like a level playing field. It's equality. That's what a tie is. Literal equality. Nobody wants that. What people want is LeBron James dominating a court. He's like the only player I know. What people want is whoever these people are, right? There's Michael Jordan. I recognize him. Muhammad Ali, who I wouldn't say is even close to a GOAT. Like Mike Tyson, his prime would have been in 4 seconds. But what we care about is these greats, right? We love Usain Bolt because he just ran. He's not like the fastest person in the world anymore, but when he was, right, we love that. We love the unlevel playing field. We love when money and genetics create this superhuman, and then we pretend like steroids is somehow a problem. Like, unlevel playing field is that's the craziest nonsense of the whole thing. I'm just going to play a couple seconds of it so you can see like what it is. But Saturday Night Live, back when it sort of wasn't funny but was culturally iconic, get into the 80s and stuff, the all-drug Olympics.
In response to what its sponsors claim is an idea whose time has come, the first all-drug Olympics opened today in Bogota, Colombia. Athletes are allowed to take any substance whatsoever before, after, and even during the competition. So far, 115 world records have been shattered. We go now to correspondent Kevin Nealon live in Bogota.
So, yeah, whatever. People are on steroids, the guy does like a deadlift and rips his arms off. and so, but that's what people want to see. What we want to see is miracles. Go watch natural bodybuilding. I did one show of that. My very last show, just like, hey, I never did anything. I'm going to show up for the one where you have to show 7 years of clean, drug use, but like no drug use, whatever, 7 years. And I was 21 at the time, so obviously I wasn't like a junkie at 13. But uh, the only reason I did that was like, oh, let me just set the record because I've been doing junkie shows, and let me just go do the clean one, just to for the sake of um, my name, cleanliness of name or whatever. And I go to this clean show, and it's sort of funny. It doesn't look like anybody works out, and you look out in the audience and nobody's there. Right? Go to the junkie shows, and that shit is packed. Like I went to watch the Mr. Olympia. My ticket was like $600, and it was like sold out and huge. I mean, like junkie people want to see spectacular. I don't want to see people do what I can do. That's not interesting. I don't want to be like, well, here's how high I can jump and how fast I can run. Let me go watch other people who can do the same thing that I can do. That's not interesting. We want spectacular in our movies, right? Would you rather watch a movie that is, filmed by high schoolers and has like a touching narrative, but is sort of executed no better than you could do it? Or would you watch the next like Spielberg and George Lucas hybrid that was actually filmed on the moon? And one of the special effects was they actually lassoed Mars and made the galactic chunks collide, and it was caught on tape. That's what people want to watch. It's the same thing with sports. Nobody wants to watch drug-free shit. Nobody would watch Tour de France if people weren't drugged out of their minds, right? It would be so boring to watch people who are pretty good at cycling, do this like repetitive activity for 10 days or however long it is. It's not interesting. So the next one is steroids strip the soul from the sport, or they contravene the spirit. They tarnish this emotional quality that sports have, right? This purity, this virtue. And people talk about the Olympics and oh, back at the old Olympics, this paragon of virtue and ethics. There's morality of all of this, and what we want is sports in their purest form, right? The human body against another human body with God-given gifts, and none of that artificial messiness, right? So now this is a very poetic argument about the soul of sport and sort of the purity here. Very poetic. It's nonsense. This is like ridiculous gibberish, though, because the history of sports has never been clean. I mean, just go back to the Vikings and their pillaging, whatever drugs and shrooms and whatever they could do to pillage with more vigor, they were doing, obviously. And in sports, everyone was doing the exact same thing. This is a nice history of anabolic androgenic steroids, and this website has it's a nice timeline here. But you look at, like, just because people hadn't synthesized testosterone doesn't mean they weren't doing every potion and herb and sort of little mixture and concoction, and if they could, they would do anything that they could. I mean, they were drugging the horses in the chariot races. The horses were drugged. The speedballs, 1860s, right? Speedballs in Amsterdam. So that's heroin and cocaine. So let's get going and let's try to mask a little pain, see how far we can get. Thomas Hicks, very famously, sort of collapses across the finish line, gold medal marathon, 1904, and he's hopped up on brandy and strychnine. But now, synthetic hormones, his sort of testosterone, androgens is what we're using, but people just didn't have access to those things a long time ago. But it's not contravening any spirit or tarnishing any soul, because like sports only exist because they're entertaining. Tons of sports that once existed exist no more. And here's a little sample of them from a narrow time period. Stuff that was in the Olympics that you're not going to see there anymore. Live pigeon shooting. All right, let it go. All right, shoot it. Like it's like Duck Hunt from the original Nintendo, except they're actual live, and bang bang. And a swimming obstacle race. I'd watch that. That'd be kind of interesting. I would want to see a tug of war. I think that would be a fascinating sport to bring back. um solo synchronized swimming, like solo version of that has like, so there's all of these different sports that once upon a time existed and don't anymore because nobody cared about them, nobody watched, and so they're dead. The head count of dead sports sort of outnumbers the living. Like, how many people are alive today? 8 billion or something. How many people have once existed? I mean, I don't know if there's more people alive. I don't know what these numbers are. How many people have once existed? How many are alive today? I mean, at some point, the number of dead people is really going to outnumber the living, and we're going to like run out of space for ash. It's like, all right, everybody's cremated, and we can't even do that anymore. Don't spread ash. That shit's everywhere. Um, and so it's similar with sports. As soon as they stop being interesting, this is an example Peter Harmer once gave us. There used to be a sport called the slow bicycle ride, and in the slow bicycle ride, you ride like 20 feet or something. You only go straight, and you only go forward, whatever, and it's like 20 feet. And the last person to cross the finish line wins. But this guy, I think he was from Japan, and just learned how to just never move. It's like nobody wants to watch a guy balance on a bicycle for 20 hours. That fascinates nobody. Like there's no like voyeur website to someone balancing on a bicycle. I would hope that doesn't exist. And so this, like, that day the sport stopped. I mean, it's as soon as a sport stops being entertaining, as soon as it stops being marketable and watchable, and spectators are cheering, it stops existing. And when something becomes interesting, people watch. During the sort of home run surge in baseball, those stands were full. And then, like, all right, let's change baseball a little bit. All right, let's empty out some of these. There's not as many home runs. It's not as fascinating, and the bleachers empty out. And it's that way for everything. Quidditch, Harry Potter gets really popular, and people used to run around on broomsticks around Pacific's campus for like 10 hours a day. I mean, literally, 5 years ago, you couldn't go anywhere without being like, speared by a broom by somebody who didn't see you standing there. And it's just like, whatever's popular, people are going to do. Now, what is popular? Steroid use. Right? Steroid use makes sports fascinating. I want to see somebody who can have like a 60-inch vertical. I want to see somebody break 8-second 100. I want to see somebody. I would watch a marathon if someone could do it in an hour. Right? This like 2 hour and 5 minute stuff. That's a long time for me. But if someone runs like an hour marathon, I mean, that's like Usain Bolt in the full sprint. I mean, I don't know how many miles an hour. I mean, that's insane. I would watch the whole thing. I would like pay-per-view that, and that's what we want to see. That's what sells. As soon as the sport stops being interesting, it stops existing. There's no such thing as a soul. And if there is a soul or a spirit to sports, you see things like the shot clock changing in basketball because it got boring, right? All right, yeah, we get up 1 point and then we just sit there and we just hang on to the ball like a little maniac kid with a kitten. And let's do that until the game ends. Nobody wants to watch somebody cuddle a basketball for the entire game. You want to watch a competitive game. So they changed the game, right? They add a shot clock. And I mean, look at the NBA introduced 24 shot clock during the 1954-1955 season, and how these things, how the shot clock saved the NBA from extinction. Drugs and supplements and training techniques and whatever. This doesn't change the sport. It doesn't change the rules. All it does is make the athlete a tiny bit better. This totally makes it a different game. It's actually it should have a different name. When I'm in Africa, when I go to Uganda and when I went to Cameroon, the pineapples and the bananas, they taste like a totally different fruit. It tastes nothing like they do here. And they're way better over there. I mean, this is like, born and raised pineapples in Cameroon. Should have a totally different name. It's like a different substance. And it's the same thing with like basketball with and without a shot clock. Call it something else. They're not the same sport. And yet that somehow doesn't tarnish the spirit of a sport. Same thing happens in most of these things. Take baseball, 1968. It was outrageous. Like, nobody got on base. It was a serious pitcher's game. Don Drysdale, right? 58 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings. I mean, this pitcher, there's 9 innings in a game. Game after game after game after game after game, nobody scores. That's not fascinating. There was one batter in the American League to break a 300 average, 339 shutouts. I mean, that's boring. Nobody wants to see that. You want to be that pitcher. right? But nobody wants to go to those games, and baseball is going to die. So what do they do in 1969? Drop the mounds. 5 inches. Let's reduce the height of the mounds and let's narrow the strike zones. And now it becomes a batter's game and people show up again. That's a totally different game, though. That's like adding a shot clock to basketball. Nobody said, like, oh, it contravenes the spirit of the sport. Nobody says that, right? It's not even baseball anymore. It's a totally different thing. What used to be, all right, can we get somebody on base, is now how many home runs can we, I mean, it becomes a completely different, it's just like home run derby. Nobody confuses that with standard baseball. It's a totally different game. So is this baseball in 1968 and baseball in 1969. Nobody pretends. It strips the soul from baseball, though. And these things like, modern nutrition, modern resistance training, coaching techniques, biomechanics, these are so much more potent than steroids in terms of their effect on the athlete. And nobody says these contravene the spirit of the sport. Babe Ruth today, everyone's like, oh, Babe Ruth, best baseball player. He might make the high school team today. Babe Ruth, if he's playing like a farm high school, where I coach in Jefferson, Oregon, it's like, yeah, there's a high school with like 300 kids. He would definitely make that team and he'd be average on it. Babe Ruth would not make Major League Baseball today. I mean, he'd suck. He was like, I was better than Babe Ruth. And he was good because he played Infinity years ago. And everyone was terrible back then. I mean, just look at the Olympics. I remember in 2008, I looked up the 1908 Olympics, and I would have had like 15 gold medals. I was 28, whatever, 27, 28, depending on when. And what I was capable of doing then without training, I would have like 15 gold medals. It was funny. It was like hilarious. And not because our genomes have changed, but because competition has changed. How many people go out for basketball now? Well, the selection pool is enormous. It's a global attraction. The selection pool is enormous. If somebody is able to play at that level, you can be pretty sure they found their way into the NBA. The selection pool is so huge. The competition is international. People are really good. A long time ago, they weren't. Babe Ruth sucked at baseball. I mean, I'm sorry, but he was horrible. And so today, stuff like resistance training techniques and our understanding of biomechanics and whether it's equipment or coaching and proper nutrition and understanding of all these things, way more effective than steroids. But nobody's putting an asterisk next to Mark McGwire's name because he played in the age of understanding of physiology. It doesn't make any sense to put an asterisk next to steroids when it's not the most potent of these things. So that gets into the next one where how does steroids tarnish the soul? While the rest of these things that are actually more effective don't upset anybody. And the two responses people give are, well, those things are natural, weightlifting and nutrition, so those are natural, and steroids are not natural, or just basic rules. So people talk about rules. Let's do rules first. This is quick. Here's where Joe Biden comes in. 1990. The banning of let's make steroids a Schedule 3 controlled substance. So this is Biden was the sponsor here back in his senatorial days, and this idea of steroids are making people more athletic than we would like to see. So let's change the rules. This is actually illegal now. So steroids are against the rules, and now today, all of these are Schedule 3 controlled substances, sort of versions of like Anastasia, Mark McGwire days. How do you hit so many home runs? Well, I'm using this drug. You will go to prison if you have this drug because of home runs, literally because of home runs. Because remember, it was illegal. You could go to prison for this thing before there was any study on side effects, and the first study that came out the next month said that we didn't find any side effects. It's home runs is why people go to prison for that. So imagine the kid who's just going to the weight room and using it, but Mark McGwire hit a lot of home runs, so that kid in high school goes to prison. That's what we're up against here. So let's talk about rules. The Tennessee founding documents, I'm sure you can still find it. I tried to go to this version of the address. They always change the addresses of things. Even pacific.edu, whenever I send people links, it's like 3 days later that link is shitty. And I wish people would just leave things where they are, but you can find this. It's online. and the Tennessee founding documents, and you see just stuff like, who is able to serve in these government roles? Well, you can't have, be employed by the church. You can't have like a minister role, but you can't like not go to church. There's a very narrow line of who's able to serve. And this one is very sensitive. Okay, so this was repealed in 1977. That's not that long ago, right? I was -3. That's not that long ago. 1977, interracial marriage. That was prohibited before Tennessee. And so in these documents, right, repealed in 1977, uh, like, is this rule worth honoring? Just because something is written, does that mean you have to honor it? You have to obey it? You have to abide by that rule? Well, I don't know. In Tennessee, it's 1975 outside. I guess interracial marriage, I'll just accept that it's prohibited. Like, you don't have to honor rules because they exist. That's what progress is all about. That's what, yeah, once upon a time, we're always horrible. Look up Abraham Lincoln, not from the perspective of everyone celebrating him, not from the perspective of Abraham Lincoln is the great liberator, not from the perspective of, he went, and it was actually weird, he went and like burned down the South when they totally had the right to secede the Union. That's like, the whole thing's weird. Now, Abraham Lincoln, was he the best president ever? Sure, probably. Yeah, I guess I would vote for Lincoln. Legitimately, Obama has a good case, but Lincoln, sure. Let's vote for him as best president ever. But read his quotations about racism and imagine he said that today. The guy would be killed. He would at least be like thrown in prison. I mean, there is no one alive today who is as big of a racist as Abraham Lincoln. Not even close. I mean, I don't care how racist you think Trump is hilarious. Read what's hilarious to me, because it doesn't like affect me. It's sensitive to other people, and I should, ethically, I have to admit that. But man, that guy was like a horrible bigot, horrible person, Abraham Lincoln. Read his quotations, read about him, not just like the movie that leaves all that shit out, right? So we begin somewhere and we have to make progress. We begin somewhere and we overturn rule by rule and make progress along the way. We don't have to honor rules just because they're written. Yeah, so like all of dueling, there's tons of these states, Iowa, West Virginia, they have dueling laws that still exist. Well, if you've been in a duel, right, or you've promoted dueling, like, yeah. And so there's all, even like Wyoming, if you build a public building, this was just weird. If the building costs more than $100,000, which essentially everything does today, you need to spend exactly 1% of the total cost on artwork, but the art may not exceed $100,000. That's weird. If you're up in Washington, not DC, but if you're, Pacific Northwest, there's like Sasquatch laws, Undiscovered Species Protection Act, and you can't harass Bigfoot. I mean, there's laws against harassing like made-up creatures. If you're in Virginia, the hunting and trapping regulations, like, okay, you can't kill whatever the exceptions to Sunday hunting prohibition. Raccoons may be hunted until 2 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and waterfowl. This is sort of ridiculous, sort of silly. Now, in Virginia, this is any person who has voluntary intercourse, right? We're not talking like, sexual assault or something. This is just, consensual sex out of marriage. That's a class 4 misdemeanor. Go to any college and let's see how anybody's following that one. Homosexual conduct in Texas, like, we're in 2003 here when this lawsuit ends. 2003. I mean, do you have to follow that, right? Like, acts between two open-eyed consenting adults. Like, why is that illegal? Again, victimless crimes. Now, in sports, you have stuff like Luis Suarez, right? The biting. I mean, that guy has a really active mouth. If you're biting somebody, if you cork your bat, if you do steroids, if you foul somebody in basketball, right? All of these things have punishments. They have punishments. They're all against the rules. You can't cork your bat. You can't foul people in basketball. But if you foul somebody, or if it's goaltending, let's say goaltending, you do goaltending, there's a penalty for that. There's a more extreme penalty for steroids, but it's just as against the rules, right? It's just more penalized. The penalty is more severe. Corking your bat, it's more severe. You might get 8 or 10 games. 10 days, 8 games, whatever it is. Okay, fine, that's a little bit more severe. But whatever penalties there are in baseball, there's specific rules for everything. You foul somebody is goaltending, or whatever it is. And in baseball right now, I think it's since 2004, I think they implemented this policy where it's first offense, second offense, third offense, fourth offense. And with each successive offense, the penalty gets more extreme in baseball for using steroids. But when you look at something like after cessation, I talked about this earlier. If you didn't use steroids, you continue to improve, the sluggish improvement. But after you go off of steroids, you might have a temporary taper, a temporary kind of tempering of your response, and this is where addiction often gets started. So now when people say, well, steroids are against the rules, so was interracial marriage, but steroids are against the rules, so I'm going to honor that rule. I will goaltend, and I'll cork my bat, or I'll foul people, but I'm not going to use steroids. Okay, that's like saying, if you're not going to use steroids, I'll just do the legal alternatives. You can do DHEA, right? This is really weak, but you can do DHEA. There's a lot of legal alternatives to steroids that you can do, but doing that, if it works, if it's androstenedione, it's like Mark McGwire's like, yeah, I just hit 70 home runs. What are you doing? Androstenedione, totally legal. You can get it from GNC, which I guess doesn't exist anymore. I think COVID ended GNC. But if you do the legal stuff and then it turns out to work, it becomes a Schedule III controlled substance. So that's like illegal forever, right? So now at this point, you've done the illegal stuff. At this point, you have done the illegal steroids. And if you do the legal stuff and it doesn't work, then it stays legal. But now you've just paid money to do something that doesn't work. Why would you do that? That's a waste of money. If you pay money to do something that does work, it's going to be classified right there with steroids. But what's more effective? Testosterone. But they're both in the exact same class of legality. What the hell are you thinking doing the legal alternatives? It doesn't make any sense. If it works, it's counted as the same thing as testosterone eventually. And then you don't get to claim that you're, quote, natural. If it doesn't work, why did you pay that money and go through the effort of doing this, right? So that's a bad conclusion to go through this one. Examples of banned pro-hormone substances. And then getting into that natural versus unnatural one. Let's get past the rules, natural versus unnatural. Earlier, I said, typical responses to the contravening of the like, why do you care that the spirit of baseball is tarnished, by baseball, but not by totally changing the game and like changing the rules? If you're like, construct a javelin differently and it goes way farther. Introduce the clap skate. We talked about that. The clap skate. Introduce that to ice skating. A pole vault, right? Let's get this pre-bent fiberglass vaulting pole, and now everybody can pole vault to the moon, and they used to just be able to get to the ceiling. These things make it a totally different sport. Why do people care about steroids affecting the sport a tiny bit? The performance of the sport a tiny bit, when they're just inventing brand new sports and just killing the old ones. And again, one of the other ones was steroids aren't natural. Okay, when was the last time you ate corn? Find natural corn, some like non-GMO, non-modified, and some variety corn. That shit's hard to find, right? Go to the store and get like non-GMO organic apples, and like everybody's diet is like inorganic and unnatural, and yeah, we try to stay organic from the sort of naturalist sense of the word, not like organic chemistry, like hydrocarbon bonds and whatever has carbon in it. But because like water's like organic water, where the hell's the carbon? But our diets are totally unnatural. Our diets are totally unnatural, but nobody's saying, well, Alex Rodriguez or whatever athlete is being, or Barry Bonds or whatever, no more corn for you, right? That's not natural. No more corn. You don't get to eat corn. And whatever it is, sports, they aren't natural. Baseballs don't grow on trees. Those things are made in the equivalent of labs. Baseballs, you don't go pluck those like, oh, hold on, let me go get some grapes. All right, next bush has baseballs on it. Let me go pick some of those. Sports are these totally arbitrary inventions. We invent rules and we construct this thing, and there's nothing natural about sports. There's nothing natural about how we train for them. this equipment and like videography and biomechanics and the equipment that's used, cleats and like that doesn't exist. You don't like the javelin isn't a root vegetable. None of this stuff is natural. But by comparison, what is natural is testosterone. It predates us. Testosterone before, not just like you and me. I mean, I'm talking like our ancestry. The upright bipedal creatures who were here before us, they had testosterone. Neanderthals had a ton of it. They're fucking huge. Like, they had a ton of it. Testosterone, super natural. So like, okay, so some testosterone you put in, and like, all right, it comes in through a needle or some like weird way. But like, go eat blueberries that are like GMO blueberries. Testosterone is more natural than that. Put some testosterone in you, put some blueberries in you. It doesn't. The argument doesn't make any sense about it being unnatural. There are no legends of Zambonis being hunted on the Sahara. None of this stuff is natural. Sports are the least natural thing in the world, especially when you get into things like blood doping. Okay, cycling. So the classic blood doping. You take blood out of you. You wait a little while. You put it back in you. That's like you spit in a bottle and then you re-drink your spit. You took something out of you and then you put that same thing back in you. Maybe you spin it down a little bit, but you put that same thing back in you. What do you mean unnatural? So tons of unnatural substances. Most of those carbohydrate powders, those are made in a lab. The marathon runners use them. Those carbohydrate goos and powders and stuff. The what you use when you're in a. I mean, I'm not talking just like gummy bears. That looks like it's from Jupiter or something. It's these carbohydrate replacement things for marathoners made in a laboratory, super unnatural. Nobody cares. Right now, there's an argument that says, well, that's just what happens when you get old. Maybe testosterone goes down, the endocrine response suffers a little bit, and you just have to. Dignified aging is not doing hormone replacement therapy. Well, I don't know. When you get old and your vision goes, and so you get glasses, right? You get old and your hearing goes. You go to the audiologist and get correct. Whatever. We correct everything as we age. We replace and correct everything, but we're not allowed to correct hormones. Correct everything else. Correct literally just whatever you have. There's a medication for it. Let's correct it. Let's see. But aging, only hormone, only testosterone. No other. The rest of the hormones, free game. They're like fair game, right? You're free to change. But testosterone, no, that's banned. It doesn't make none of these make any. I just don't get it. Now you could make an argument. This one's actually fine. Okay, I'll go with this. Sexual selection. It doesn't get passed to the offspring. You do a bunch of steroids. Anabolic, androgenic, you do androgens, steroids, and you present yourself as this titan, as this marvel of human performance. That's not going to get passed on to the offspring, though. But steroids, you get bigger, stronger, faster, more impressive athletically, and that you may be fooling a potential mate. Let's just make this like an anthropological investigation. Somebody looks at you like, ooh, I want kids who have that quality. I want my offspring to be, NFL ready. Well, it doesn't get passed on. It's like makeup, right? You see somebody in their makeup, and they don't come up to you and say, oh, just so you know, tomorrow morning, it's going to be like smeared and weird. I'm not going to look at anything like this. So nobody comes up and says that. And we all just sort of make the assumption that there's a difference between makeup and regular face. And steroids, okay, let's just make the assumption. If we're all honest about whether we use steroids, just make not all these traits are going to be selective enticers, right? They're going to be passed along. So maybe, but let's get into number 9, because none of those things really work. I mean, just from any perspective that you consider them, there's such fragile arguments that just collapse at like an exhale. You don't need like typhoon wind to come in and blow those arguments down. You just need like a long sigh at the end of the day, and all those arguments just blow away. But what the truth seems to be for people, because you can talk them out of this, but what the truth seems to be is that people think you're getting something for nothing. People think when you do steroids, you get something for nothing. And that's what's unfair. It's like, look, you didn't pay your dues. You didn't work hard. You got something for nothing. I don't like that. That's what makes people really uncomfortable. The idea that someone gets something for nothing, but it's actually not true. Because if you do a ton of steroids and don't go work out, you just sort of have to dispose of all of this testosterone. So just, I don't know, send it to the prostate, get a huge prostate and have trouble peeing. That's the consequence of you not, putting your steroids to good use. So what steroids really do is enhance recuperative power. You recover better. It allows you to work harder. Steroids enable harder work more repetitively, more hours, better. They permit discipline, free range, right? Discipline can now march ahead unobstructed. That's what steroids do best. Yeah, they do other things too, but what they do best is they allow people to work, do squats 3 days a week instead of 1.5, right? They allow people to get on the tennis court 6 days a week instead of 2.5, right? That's really what they allow you to do. And so that really became my excuse of why I didn't do steroids. I don't want to work that hard. I'm a little too lazy for that. If you do a bunch of steroids and don't put them to good use, why would I do that? And so steroids would have allowed me to get in, 80% more workouts. I don't want to work that hard. But the human form can't get up and down a basketball court like LeBron James can without chemical alterations. And the human form can't get through. I'm sure some people can. You get through the intense PhDs and MD programs stuff without chemical assistance. But I mean, you're going to see at least caffeine, if not something stronger. And everybody that I know for whom I have knowledge of their study habits, and if somebody did their PhD in 1945 or something, I'm going to doubt that they were doing like sophisticated, maybe they were doing coffee, but I invented my own drugs. But again, in contemporary doctoral studies, almost ubiquitous, these drugs, almost. So I'm willing to admit it, though. Everyone who does drugs of some sort, some performance enhancing drugs, just say it. Fuck, be honest. Don't be like a secretive asshole. That's the problem, is people are like super secretive. Admit what you do. And it's fine. Like steroids are like less harmful than this shit. And nobody, we all use this stuff for school. But the comparison I'm making here is it allows you to study harder. It allows you to work harder. If you do Adderall, now, I'm not trying to be insensitive for ADHD, ADD cases and necessity. I'm talking from the perspective of ergogenic aids. If you do Adderall and then you sit around watching a Bad Friends rerun for the 15th time, you don't get smarter. Now, you can remember Rachel and Ross's exchange with perfect clarity. All right, that doesn't help you in school. That doesn't help you advance your career. Right, that doesn't help anything. A trivia night, if like late 90s television trivia comes up, fine. All right, it's unlikely to. You have to actually work. These things allow you to work harder, to focus longer, to study harder and longer. That's what those things do. It's the same thing as steroids. Now, pharmacologically, they work super differently. We can talk about it later if you want. I don't really care, but they work very differently. But so the truth seems to be that people are afraid of other people getting something for nothing. If there's like a free deal somewhere and everyone else got that free deal, you're like, oh, I didn't get it. And you're mad. And you missed some coupon that everyone got. That's like, get a free car coupon for some reason. You're like pissed when other people get it. Pissed that everyone got it but you. If nobody got it, you wouldn't care. Other people got it. They got something for nothing. That affects us viscerally. There's something that really upsets us there. But we're not forced to compete against those people, and we don't care about their liver toxicity and stuff with baseball. I mean, none of that stuff really seems to matter. So these are the 9 things. I talked about them at length, probably to myself. I'll see in a second if anybody's here. But the arguments don't actually work, but I do want you to know those 9. And what I'm not saying is that steroids are good and people should do them. Right? I mean, there's a reason I didn't. Not a particularly good one. But I'm not pro-steroid. I'm just also not anti-steroid, because the anti-steroid arguments seem to be gibberish to me. And I don't like gibberish. I like well-reasoned arguments that are consistent with facts and science. And I haven't heard a steroid argument opposing steroids that's consistent with facts, that's consistent with science. I just hear a bunch of fallacies. Oh, there are a few of you. Look at you guys. All right, go do you for whatever it is that you're doing for the weekend. Thanks for sticking around. That was very nice. It makes lecturing rewarding when I'm lecturing to people.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'll see you guys.
Thank you.